So, as my trip to Chicago is winding down, I thought I would take you guys to where it all began for me here at Deltronics with my mentor, Mr. Mike Delvalle. He owns this shop in Woodridge, Illinois, and they repair all sorts of audio gear. You fix everything.
We fix everything, mainly audio. We dumped all video stuff. We don't do any televisions anymore. We don't do any VCRs, any DVD players, any of that stuff. Video games, none of that stuff. Strictly audio. So our biggest business probably is pro audio gear, big speakers and mixers and things like that for DJs. Guitar amps are a pretty big part, and then a lot of vintage audio.
Tell me about the first thing you remember fixing ever in your life.
First thing ever in my life I remember fixing was probably an electric fan. I had a fascination with fans when I was a kid. I still actually do. I have quite a collection of old fans. But yeah, there was a fan, I think my grandmother's house or something, and it stopped. And I was probably about 6 or 7 years old, and I tore it apart and I fixed it. And that was when I realized
you can do
this
it.
is my thing, man. How do I fix fans for a living?
As a 6 or 7 year old.
And I fixed a fan and it worked.
Okay, so after you fixed that fan, what else did you?
What I did was, after that, my mom realized that I was kind of into that stuff. So she knew this electrician. But he sold everything, stereo consoles, washers and dryers, television consoles, all that stuff. The place was called Lambert's. It was owned by an old guy named Dwight Lambert. So Dwight was kind of like my mentor. I started like hanging around with him on Saturday when I was just a kid, like 12 years old. I'd ride around with him in the truck, and he would do everything. He was like this. He was one of these guys who could do anything at all. He could plumb. He was an auctioneer. He could fix anything.
Man.
Yeah, it was Renaissance.
You're kind of like that too.
Well, he was the old school guy though. I mean, really, he could rip anything apart and fix it. It didn't matter. So I learned a lot from him. So I used to hang around with him. And then he also had a TV repair shop in his business run by an old guy named Cappy. And Cappy was this old, pissed off, cigar chomping guy. But I found that I was more fascinated with that end of it than the running the AC wiring and motors and things like that.
Right.
Because I was an audio guy and I love music. So I would like to watch Cappy work because Cappy actually was fixing, console stereos. So in those days, everything was tubes, as you know. Mm-hmm. So it was great because I learned what a tube was and how a tube worked. And that's when it really started piquing my interest in electronics. Then I started playing music kind of semi-professionally, and I couldn't afford anything, so I would have to build all my own stuff. So that's when I started first building my own amps and shit.
Cool.
And it worked out pretty well because, you could go in the alley in those days whenever anybody throw out an old television. Me and my brother
There's tubes in there and stuff.
Pick it up.
Parts.
You get tubes and parts and speakers. And, you'd put a bunch of speakers in a box and make an amplifier and, plug your guitar into it. It sounded pretty good,
Cool, yeah.
So that's how that all started. And then from then on, by the time I got to high school, I was pretty much known as the guy who could fix anything, and it just worked out.
The rest is history.
Yeah, the rest is history, and I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah. All right, so tell me about your days working at Pacific Stereo.
So I went to Western Illinois University, and I graduated with a business degree, and I got out of college, and I was looking for a job, and a friend of mine worked at Pacific Stereo as a salesperson, and her name was Brenda. And Brenda called me and said, "Hey, they're looking for technicians." I go, "I just spent a lot of money getting
my
a business degree." She's like, "Hey, a technician," and I remember this is in 1979. A starting technician, you can make $35,000. I go, $35,000? My buddies that just graduated from college are starting at 18, 18.5. Mm-hmm. I go, okay. So I went to the interview and I met this guy, Mike Baszler, who was the head guy of the region in Chicago. Pacific had stores started in California, in Northern California, and then spread around. We had stores in Texas, St. Louis, Milwaukee, Chicago. It was pretty big company. Mm-hmm. It was originally owned by CBS.
And it was just
we sold stereos, stereo systems, amps, receivers, speakers.
Home audio,
that's it. Turntables, It was originally, like I said, was CBS owned. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Baszler interviewed me, and he gave me this test, and it was a ridiculous test. Like 16 pages of formulas.
Technical questions.
And I'm like looking, I'm like, this is easy shit. And I hand it back to him. He's like, "You done already?" Oh yeah. He looked there. He's like, "You got all these right." I go, "I told you I knew what I was doing. I wasn't here. I mean, I'm not one of these guys that like lies." He's like, "Okay." So he started me there, and he put me in Oak Lawn at 95th and Cicero, up in my first store. And I started fixing stuff, and I cleaned out their log pretty quick. So then they had a pretty big store in Lombard, so he moved me to Lombard, and I cleaned out that store. And then he made me what they call a tech at large. So I used to have to drive around to all the others, because we had like 16 stores. And I used to drive around to the 16 stores and fix what their technicians couldn't fix. So it was good.
That's
it was really good.
Hey,
it was
that's
great.
Meet a lot of people.
Well, it was
fix
great.
A lot of stuff.
That's how I found the city area.
Oh, okay.
Because whenever I would go down to the Newtown store, which was on Broadway and Belmont, in the city, there was unlimited work down there. That place was a gold mine.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked Baszler, I said, "Can I just be set there? I know it's a long way from my house, because I never really lived in the city." But he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I need a manager down there. You want to be the service manager?" I go, "Yeah, please." So he set me up as service manager, and that's where that was my home for quite a few years. And then the company went belly up in 1986.
And that's when you...
And I just had my first child, Amy, and I bought my first house in North
Terrible timing.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, guess what? And they locked the doors, and we got no severance pay or anything.
Really?
They just gone. So I'm like, oh shit. So I said to my wife, "What do you think we should do? You think I should start looking for another gig, or maybe get out of electronics?" And I said, "Why don't you try just opening a place and see what we can do?" So we took the baby, we put her in a buggy, we walked up and down Broadway and looked for a empty storefront near where Pacific Stereo was.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, we found one. It was downstairs, like 4 steps. The windows were at sidewalk.
So it was like a garden.
Yeah,
unit.
a garden unit. Yeah, it was only about, I think, 650 feet. A little tiny place with about 5 windows in the front, so you could just see people's feet as they walk by. And so we had the baby in the buggy. We're walking there, and I said, "Well, let's see if we can rent this store." So I called the guy, and I had no credentials or anything. I didn't know anything. I had no credit, you know. But luckily, the guy was cool, and he said, "Okay, I'll."
He saw your vision.
He saw the vision. He said, "Yeah, I need somebody in there. It sounds like it might work." So sure enough, we opened the store there, and I called the landlord who owned the place that Pacific Stereo was in, and he was pissed because they had screwed him out of the lease.
Mm-hmm.
So he allowed me to put a sign in there in the door that said, "For service or service-related questions, 3441 Broadway." That was where my place was. I even tried to get the old phone number, but I couldn't, you know. So that's what happened. So we just started getting busy. Mm-hmm. So then it just grew out of there. I moved it to Halsted Street. Then there was a store for sale. I bought the store front, condo, moved the store into there. Then I opened this one in 2005. I sold the city one to the technician that runs it down there now last year. Mm-hmm. So it's still Deltronics, but I don't own that one anymore, so I don't have to go to the city anymore, which is great. And Woodridge is still here, so that's how it all started.
Yeah, cool. So what are some of your favorite things to fix?
I'll be real honest with you, I can't really say.
You don't find enjoyment in it anymore?
I do sometimes. I mean, occasionally, but most of this stuff is so routine, and I've done it so many times, and there's nothing that I haven't seen. I did have some fun. Remember that video I sent you with that little turntable that lifted the records back up?
I do.
That was fun. Mm-hmm. Those old mechanical things are a joy, because it's all mechanical, gears and wheels and things like that. And when you resurrect it from the dead, when it hasn't worked for 30 years or 40 years, and somebody finds it in the basement, and they remember their grandmother used to play 78 records on it. And, you actually get it to work, and you watch the thing literally play the record, and the needle picks up, it lifts the record up and puts it back on the spindle, drops it back down and plays it again. Like, so cool. That's pretty cool,
Yeah, it is,
But I mean, fixing like something like this amplifier, it's just mundane work.
Right. I understand that. But you find joy in the old gear.
The old gear is fun. And I don't mind fixing things that are hard to fix because, there is some joy in the ability to bring something back to life.
Absolutely.
You know
There's
what I
a
mean?
lot of satisfaction in that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
cool. Well, as long as I've known you, there really hasn't been anything you can't fix.
no, well,
As much of a headache as certain things can be.
I'm just very bound and determined.
You
And
are. You are.
I will not stop until it starts
He literally
working.
works 7 days a week.
I work 7 days a week, and I will not stop until it's fixed. Some of the new equipment that we have now that are coming in, this microprocessor-based stuff, this doesn't really apply as much to guitar amps, but keyboards, electronic keyboards, if they obsolete a part, let's say the main engine in the keyboard, I mean, you can't fix it. It's not that you don't want to fix it. Yeah, you can't make that part. That was custom made for that particular unit, and in order to tool up and make it, it would cost you $10,000. You go buy another keyboard for that price.
Right.
So that, in that case, obviously, but with tube amplifiers, you can fix it.
Yeah.
You can get any old Fender, any old Son, any old Gibby,
anything.
any of those things.
Yeah,
you can find subs for the transformers. You can find subs for the tubes. You can find anything and make it work.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, totally.
And that's what you do.
Yeah, it is. That's why I like fixing the vintage stuff primarily, is because, they're usually always repairable, and the design of the amps are easier to understand. Yeah, right. Exactly. It's not computerized. Or anything. And the way my brain works, it's easier for me to understand those.
To trace the circuitry from the input from the guitar to the speaker.
Exactly.
It
makes sense.
Logical.
Yes.
Right. It's logical. Whereas some of this new stuff, it's like the engineers are trying to mess with us. It's like
they don't want you to understand.
Right. The best stuff, and plus the stuff that's gonna be always fixable.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can keep that stuff alive
Always
for decades
fixable.
and decades.
Yeah, decades and decades. Yeah. I mean, we're fixing stuff, you and I, that was made before either one of us was born.
Yeah, that's pretty special.
Yeah, and we can fix it and make it sound just as good as it sounded when they bought it.
Good as new, yeah. Tell me about some of your biggest repair failures / nightmares.
Well, we were speaking earlier about this off camera. I was working on an old Philco Lowboy AM shortwave radio from, what year was that from? 1932. It had not been working. This guy, it was his great-grandmother's radio. They found it in the basement when they were cleaning out the house. It was in really good shape. It was one of these tall console radios on 4 legs, but they called it a lowboy because the legs were only about this long and the body was pretty tall. It had like a 12-inch speaker in it. Really a cool old radio. Probably cost a good fortune in those days. I mean, by our money. It was
kind of top of the line in those days.
Yeah, it was because it had like 5 shortwave bands and an AM band. So the guy brings it in and we tear it apart. And, it hasn't run for 75 years, so all the capacitors in it are dead. You have to replace everything in it. They see all the resistors worked, and the coils and the tubes actually were all good, although it was missing a few tubes. So the main problem with those things is the tuners and the mechanical parts get stuck because over time they don't move. Nobody turns a tuner. So we use solvent like stuff like this. To clean that up. Well, unfortunately, this stuff's flammable. And, you don't think about that. So you're spraying away. You're spraying away. And so I'm trying to clean it and get it moving and everything. It's still not moving. So I take out my trusty torch. And as soon as I hit the torch to loosen up this thing, the entire radio goes up in flames. So it's burning, So here I am. All my people are standing around here laughing and watching it, okay? Instead of doing anything to help me. My light's hanging over the top of the thing. Now it's hot. I go to move the light away. I burn the hell out of my hand, pushing the light out of the way. So the only thing I can think of, I'm blowing on it. I can't get it to go out because there's so much of this stuff in there. So I take my trusty Windex bottle, and I just squirt the Windex on it. It finally puts it out. But I actually did fix it. And over time, it took a while
After it caught literally
after the
caught
fire. That's probably the
Shit happens.
biggest fail.
Yeah. Tell me about a time you got the shit shocked out of you.
Oh yeah, there's that happens, as you know, in tube.
Oh, I know it happens.
You got to get it.
Yeah.
Occasionally, it's
But
good for you.
is there a shock that like really?
There was one
launched you?
shock. They make some speakers called electrostatic speakers, and this doesn't really apply much to musical instruments. But for a while, they were going with a lot of these audiophiles. We're using these electrostatic speakers, which are basically a mylar, almost like a drum head, stretched really tight between two high-powered electrodes, and the whole thing moves rather than a cone like on a speaker. Mm-hmm. So it's very lifelike and very, very good sound. The problem is that it's, because you have to have so much voltage between the two plates to make the mylar move, it draws a lot of dust in and it gets dirty, and over time they don't work. So anyway, I was working on one of these amplifiers, and there's 5,000 volts potential. And I had my trusty oscilloscope, and I was trying to figure out what was going on. And on an oscilloscope probe, there's a little ground ring on the end of the probe, which I had my finger on. Didn't realize it. I'm resting my other arm on the top of this, and I tied into the 5,000 volts. It blew the breaker in the building, knocked all the lights out. I just sat there for a second and kind of processed, made sure my heart was still beating, which it was.
You're like, I'm still alive.
I'm still alive, but that was the shock.
Yeah,
that was the shock. That most of the time that would kill somebody.
You're lucky.
I had other things to do.
All right, well, my final question is, tell me about some of the favorite amps or other gear that you have had or that you own or use.
Okay.
Yeah.
My favorite, I'm a keyboard player. Mm-hmm. I think some
very good one at that.
Wow, thank you. Some of the best, I think, pictures of tube equipment, and I think something that really changed the way it changed music was the Leslie speaker, which has a 50-watt tube amp in the bottom of it. A Leslie speaker, if you don't know, is a organ speaker, although you can play guitar through it too. And it has a spinning horn on the top of it, and then a 15-inch speaker that faces down with a rotor in front of that. So that the horn goes one way, the 15 goes the other way, and there's two speeds. So you can play it at the slow speed, which kind of gives you this chorusing effect, or you can play it at the high speed, which kind of gives you a vibrato effect. And in the bottom of that thing, they have a 50-watt tube amp with two 6550s, and they break up just perfectly. They have a perfect distortion, if you want to call it distortion, or scaz, or however you want to call it. Little dirt. But it's perfect. And for some reason, when you play through a Leslie, whether you're playing a guitar through it or a organ, especially a Hammond B3 organ, which is basically what the thing was designed for. Funny note, Lawrence Hammond, the guy who invented the Hammond B3, hated Paul Leslie because Paul Leslie developed a cabinet that sounded better than his own cabinets because he just used straight speakers. They were all tube too, but they're straight speakers. They didn't have, for some reason, when you run that organ through the Leslie speaker, it comes alive.
Yes.
It jumps alive.
It sure does.
And there's something about it, and it is. So Hammond went to his grave hating Paul Leslie. He ruined my.
I always thought of that as like a.
Well, you would think you would, best.
They go together. Go together so well.
Yeah, exactly. Like peanut butter and jelly.
Exactly.
But no, it was completely the opposite. And Paul Leslie never understood why Hammond didn't like him. He's like, I think more people are playing your organs now.
Yes.
But see, all Lawrence Hammond was saying was, but nobody's buying my cabinets anymore. And people were trading them.
Stick to the organs, not the cabinets.
Just build the organs. Let Paul Leslie build the speakers.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's probably my
favorite
piece of gear. That, and I think in guitar amp realm, probably my favorite amp, the Super Reverb amp. The Blackface Super from like 66, 67, 4 Jensen Alnico 12s, or 10s, 10-inch speakers. It's an unusual amp because it plays into a 2 ohm load. Most amps are 8 or 4. The Super Reverb all the speakers are in parallel, so it's a 2 ohm load, and so therefore it has to have a really big output transformer to carry the current, and that's just the nicest sound to me.
It's an iconic
To
sound.
me, it's
It's
iconic.
an iconic amp.
You know, I love that. That's probably my favorite tube amp of all time.
Cool.
You-
I love them too.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love all Fenders.
Yeah.
I mean, I love pretty much anything from
Yeah.
the 40s
I know.
through the 70s.
Yeah.
so.
The Basements are great too because the Basement had a great grit to it.
Yes.
Although it had no reverb or treble.
Right, it was just
and
bare bones,
bass-
just volume and tone.
Volume,
and
treble,
contrast,
bass,
yeah.
you know. But yeah, you turn those up to 10,
Oh, yeah.
they sound great.
There's nothing like it.
They
really.
sound great. I mean, you know, you get nice warm sustain. It works with you. It doesn't fight you.
Exactly.
You know, it's a good instrument to have.
Cool.
So.
Well, thank you so much for talking with
Well,
me, Mikey.
thank you
This
very
is one of the
much.
kings of my universe.
And she is one of the queens of mine, and I love her. And please keep watching her videos.
Aw, thank you.